Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to talk to you about the ongoing impact of the war in Iran on the global economy and what's happening in the financial markets. Because for the first time, we've now got some actual data coming through that shows that there is a damaging impact. So this is no longer just theoretical, we're starting to see real world effects. I also want to talk about Donald Trump and his attempts to try to bring this war to an end. The US has sent what's being described as a 15-point plan to Iran, and Donald Trump is saying that there's progress and that Iran wants to deal and that discussions are happening. But at the same time, the response coming out from Iran is completely different. So we'll have a look at what the two sides have said, because it's clear that they are not on the same page at all. But just before we get into all of that, can I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button? It only takes you a second and it really does help me with the algorithm. Now, in terms of what's actually happening on the ground in the conflict, there is still an escalation. There have been further strikes over the past 24 hours, continued missile and drone attacks across multiple countries in the region, and no signs of slowing down. We've also got reports that the US is now sending thousands more troops from the 82nd Airborne Division into the Middle East, on top of the around 50,000 that are already there. So despite all of the talks about negotiations, the military situation actually seems to be intensifying. And the reason that this matters for the global economy is because of the disruption to the energy markets. We've seen the Strait of Hormuz basically being closed for the entirety of this war. And as I mentioned before, around 20% of the world's energy flows through that route, oil and gas, every single day. So the fact that the strait is now closed is feeding into higher costs, supply chain issues, and ultimately slower growth for the global economy. Now let's talk about Donald Trump and the proposed deal, because this could be the solution that everybody is hoping will bring an end to the war. As I've just mentioned, the US has put forward what's being described as a 15-point plan. Now, we don't have the full details of that plan, they haven't been released, but it's been reported that they include things like a ceasefire, discussions around dismantling Iran's nuclear program permanently, ending support for proxy groups such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, and reopening key shipping routes like the Strait of Hormuz. That's obviously what everybody really wants. And Donald Trump has been very confident, saying that Iran wants to deal and that progress is now being made. However, Iran is saying something very different. One of Iran's senior military figures appeared on Iranian television and effectively mocked the idea of negotiations, saying that the US appears to be negotiating with itself. And he made it very clear that Iran has no intention of doing a deal. Iran's leadership has also previously said that they will not negotiate with the USA, given the fact that they believe that recent military actions took place during negotiations. So they're referring to the attacks that took place in June of 25 and obviously the current situation. So from Iran's perspective, they believe that there is a complete lack of trust on both sides. And I think this is where the situation becomes really interesting, because Donald Trump's approach with any negotiation has always been to go in very aggressively, apply maximum pressure on the other side, and then negotiate back from that position of strength. So if we think about the recent Greenland situation, initially Donald Trump had said, well, we're going to take Greenland, we're going to own it. And obviously the whole of Europe was up in arms about that, not literally up in arms, but up in arms metaphorically. And then eventually a deal was agreed whereby the US has full access to Greenland. It can put as many military bases as it likes into the area, and also has access to some of the minerals and other things that are located there. So I think that's a good example of Donald Trump going in very aggressively and then winding back to the position that he actually wanted to get to. But this situation is very different, because Iran isn't playing along with the art of the deal strategy. They're not accepting the framework, they're not engaging in the same way as other parties have done, and they're not showing any willingness to step back at this stage. And I think another thing that's really interesting is how the financial markets have reacted to what's been going on, particularly with all this talk of a deal, because in direct response to Donald Trump's statements, we've seen the markets bouncing back. Stock markets have been rising and oil prices have now fallen back below $100 per barrel. And what that tells you is that the markets are constantly looking for good news. They're always trying to price in the return to normality as quickly as possible. The moment there's even a hint of a resolution, you see assets rallying and energy prices coming down. But the big question here is whether the markets are being too optimistic, because when you look at what's actually happening on the ground, the conflict is still ongoing, tensions are still high, and there's no clear agreement in place. And more importantly, when you look at the data that's now coming through, it really doesn't support that optimism. We've now got the latest Purchasing Managers Index data for March. And just to explain what that is in simple terms, this is a survey of thousands of different businesses around the world. The people being surveyed are the ones responsible for ordering in materials, managing supply chains, and planning ahead for their business. So they tend to see changes very early. Anything above an index score of 50 means that their business and the economy is growing. Anything below 50 means that it's shrinking. And what we've seen in March is a clear shift across multiple major economies. In Europe, growth has almost stalled, with activity only just above that key 50 level. In the UK, growth has also slowed sharply, and businesses are reporting significant increases in cost, particularly in relation to fuel, transport, and raw materials. In the USA, overall growth is weaker, particularly in services, with rising costs and increasing uncertainty reported by many countries. Japan is also seeing slower growth and rising input costs, which is not surprising given its reliance on energy imports. India's growth has slowed to its lowest level in several years, with costs rising quickly. And in Australia, it's probably the worst situation because the index has actually fallen below 50, which means that the private sector is now contracting. So when you step back and look at all of that, the message is very clear. Growth is slowing across the world, and at the same time, prices are going up. And that creates a really difficult situation for central banks because they're stuck between supporting growth and controlling inflation. So when you compare that data to what the financial markets are doing, there's a clear disconnect. Markets are behaving as if this situation is going to resolve itself quite quickly. But the data is telling us that the damage is already being done. And I think that's the key question for the rest of 2026. How much lasting damage has already been caused? Because even if this conflict were to end tomorrow, which it won't, the impact on supply chains, costs, and confidence doesn't just disappear overnight. So the bottom line here is that the economic impact of this war is now real and measurable. We're seeing slower growth across major economies. We're seeing rising costs, we're seeing increasing uncertainty, and in some cases, we're already seeing contraction. At the same time, there is no clear sign that this conflict is close to ending. The diplomatic situation is unclear, the military situation is still active, and the risks to the global economy remain very high. So I'll keep you posted on any further news and developments as and when they occur, but hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you have liked what I've said, or maybe you didn't like it, but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Don't forget I'm currently running my competition where you can win my property or a cash alternative prize. Got some really exciting deals on the go at the moment, so please check that out. It's another way of funding the channel. Thank you also to everyone that's supporting me in other ways. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you so much for that support. Really does mean a lot to me, helps to keep me motivated, and here's something to put a smile on your face.